Living on the Outer Banks, living on a thin strip of sand out in the middle of the Atlantic, it's super unique, but it's also super delicate too, and just one storm could really change it forever.
Well, actually, I first came here in '71. It was definitely a lot different back then. The tourist industry was just kind of getting started here back then, I would say. A lot of people were commercial fishing or doing construction work. The surf was empty. You know, you could find nice waves all to yourself, and it was so consistent compared to Florida, no doubt about that. And Boys at Natural Art decided to move the factory up here, and my wife and I opened a little shop down the street. Owned it since 1977, so been here ever since. You know, on any given day, if you go looking, you can find a good wave. When it's big and it's breaking hard, it breaks as hard as anywhere.
Yeah, growing up here, like you were on an island, so at some point you're gonna be in the water. Before boogie boards were invented, like aging myself, before the boogie board was like a thing, you would go and buy it was like a 4-foot long surfboard made out of styrofoam. And we'd take that to the beach, and essentially like the first wave would break it in half, so like all the siblings would get like a piece to ride. So that's kind of where it started.
In 1970, came up here camping, brought the fishing poles, and just came up for a 10-day spring break, and that kind of set it off. I love it here. I mean, you can obviously, who would know you're on the middle of an island right here, 25 miles out in the ocean. Surfed around the world, and you can catch it as good as you can catch it any place on the planet. And out here, you can also do it with not too many people around. You can still find your own break if you're willing to click the 4-wheel drive in and go.
There's always been a group of 2 riders here. You kind of have your mainstays, like Kevin's always been around, Scott's always been around, you know, Jeff Midget. Russell Blackwood was a big inspiration growing up. If you grew up shooting surf photos here, at some point you were influenced by Mickey McCarthy. Growing up when we had the jetties, it wasn't like super hollow, it was just a lined up like Point Break. When we get waves now, everywhere just seems to just be like super heavy, super dumpy. If you learn how to surf here, you can surf anywhere in the world. Everywhere now, it seems to me, is just you're falling out of the sky and just pray you set an edge.
It's kind of luck of the draw here. The surf here kind of prepares you for waves of consequence. You know there's surf, you know there's swell, and you're trying to find that sandbar, and it's basically, you know, a good 30 to 40 miles of just empty beaches. You can pull over at any random spot and find the most perfect wave.
I've been all over the world traveling, and there's something about the way the waves come from really deep off the continental shelf and then just hit the shallow sandbars, and it just jacks up pretty much everywhere here on the Outer Banks. So you have to get up quick, and you just go super fast down the line, and then the wave closes out, basically. I never grew up longboarding because it just wasn't even possible, because you're basically surfing like steep beach break all the time. The waves on the Outer Banks are unlike any other place in the world because it's so heavy. It can be so steep.
If you can't barrel ride, the Outer Banks is probably not for you.
I'll do a Noah story right now. When I was learning with Craig Watson and Noah, they took me out and it was a big day, and I was on a shortboard and had no experience being on a shortboard at all. I couldn't duck dive to save my life. And I remember going out and trying to duck dive and just getting beat up. It flipped me all the way back with more power than I'd ever experienced. And I remember looking over, and Noah and Craig were laughing, and they're like, yeah, that's groundswell.
It's just raw beach break. I mean, sandbars are always shifting, always changing. Sometimes you'll get waves that are just crashing like right on the beach and like just super thick, doubled up. And then sometimes you'll have the most perfect A-frame sandbar that you can find with you and your friends, and it's just like a playground.
It's pretty wild how drastically different the waves are on the island, just from the southern tip of Hatteras to, northern tip of Pea Island, and then up into town from South Nags Head all the way up through Corolla. Corolla basically faces northeast, Hatteras faces southeast. There's so many like turns to the islands. You can have offshore winds that are southwest. You can have offshore winds that are northeast. You have offshore winds that are northwest. We have so many angles where the wind can be offshore. We have so many angles where one swell can break in totally different directions. So there's just like always something to go ride. And the beauty of this place is that you can hunt and find your own wave. The downfall is that everywhere that you surf, you have to pull on the side of the road. People just see a car and like, oh, that must be a surf spot. So if people pull over, like, it happens to me pretty badly.
People they identify you in that car, and that's what they look for. And if they would see that car on the road or the side of the road, they wouldn't even go anywhere else. It was just like, oh, it must be good here, let's go here. It's almost like we kind of have that X on us.
In 1933, the CCC came in and established a dune line here, and then they put in a road and kind of told the dune and the ocean to stop here, and we're coming up almost 100 years of that happening, and it's almost like a giant science experiment telling a barrier island to stop moving. Growing up here, when we would have a hurricane, the power would go out after a storm, and we wouldn't have power for like 2 weeks, and it was just miserable. Depending on what you do for a living, you're either really stressing out, or if you're a teenager and you don't have any responsibility, you're kind of amping because there's going to be potential for waves. It'll be completely flat it'll be rearranging houses. Usually, if it's a bad one, people have had 2 or 3 or 4 foot of water in their house, or their house is completely gone. So they're in a super vulnerable spot in life.
Yeah, I think there's been twice where like the night before I was just sitting outside and just thinking like, okay, like the whole landscape could look different tomorrow. Our lives could look different tomorrow. Like, I've prepared with like worst case scenario in mind and ran through all kinds of wild stuff in my head. But when 140 or whatever homes on the island have been flooded and need work, you can't go anywhere without somebody being like, are you good? Do you need a hand? Is everything all right? Like, I think that we shine the most in those moments.
The storms are definitely something that we look at closely. We know they're going to change our life either by the day, by the week, by the month.
The storms do knit us together, and they really make the residents resilient. Yeah, everybody knows it's going to come, even if it's a nor'easter. I think it makes us a little different and sets us apart. When you get flooded or you lose something in a storm, it's this terrible feeling, and you don't want anybody to be left alone when somebody else experiences that. Because a lot of these storms, a block down the road is like disastrous, and your house is fine. So everybody really kind of joins together and helps each other and makes sure everybody survives.
The whole community is just checking on each other. You're driving up and down the road, like making sure people are good and lending a hand where you can. And it's the worst of times, but it's also like the most special.
There's a few times in your life that you'll especially with music or places and certain feelings that you'll get to where you feel like you're home, and the Outer Banks was always like that for me. I can't explain it. The colors, the smells, the sea, it's like I just felt like I belonged here.
Life is fast-paced. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of pressures and different things, and I feel like, you can go and literally drive over the bridge, pull off on the side of the road, and you can have pretty much an empty beach to yourself, and You don't get that everywhere. So I think it's kind of the peace, the tranquility of the place, just being able to kind of like check out.
There's a few things that make up the Outer Banks, things like Winks and Kitty Hawk, it's been there forever. Art's Place, John's Drive-In, these little tiny locally owned businesses that have been here forever. If you drive down a Nag's Head and you look on the ocean front and you see the old school Nag's Head cottages, how they used to be, and people taking pride in restoring them and keeping them that way. That to me is the Outer Banks, so I feel like I get anxiety seeing little tiny cottages like bulldozed, because if we lose like the sense of the Outer Banks, it's not going to be that feeling of the Outer Banks anymore. It's just going to be like plastic buildings.
The Outer Banks to me is home, you know. I was raised here, and I can just kind of breathe and almost kind of smell the salt water and the sand dunes. And
being 5 minutes or a mile from the beach right here, you get to see it all. I see it all. It comes, it goes, but it never gets old in my book. It just does not get old.
I really like it here. I like the sense of community that's here. I couldn't tell you why I live here. I just love it here.
The Outer Banks to me is just part of my life. Like, my dad moved here when he was 18 out of high school, and I grew up here, and now my kids are growing up here, and I told them, I was like, look, like, you actually have like a family heritage here that's starting, and I am just so fortunate to call it home, and I just love that I get to be a part of this place.
The people here on Hatteras, they mean a lot to me. It's a community. It's people I grew up with. It's people that my kids are growing up with. I just love documenting the realness of the people that live here, the rawness of the people that live here. The reason why I've stayed here on Hatteras, it's not that it's easy. If anything, it's hard living here. But at the same time, it's one of the most beautiful places on the planet.
There's a few times in your life that you'll like, especially with music or places and certain feelings, that you'll get to where you feel like you're home, and the Outer Banks was always like that for me.
Life is fast-paced. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of pressures. Literally drive over the bridge, pull off on the side of the road, and you can have pretty much an empty beach to yourself.
I can just kind of breathe and almost smell the salt water and the sand dunes and the sea oats.
I couldn't even imagine living anywhere else. I couldn't even imagine being a part of a different community. I am just so fortunate to call it home, and I just love that I get to be a part of this place.